Hello and welcome to Tippcast today with myself, Shane Stapleton, joined as ever by Shane Brophy, sports editor of the Nina Guardian. We're going to have Brian Flannery on in a little while, former Tipperary underage player and former Waterford hurler.
Pity party! Pity party all around this week.
It certainly is, doesn't it? It just feels like a post-mortem, a show we'd rather not do, but like you can't ignore it. Like Tipperary season is over, but it feels like there's more to talk about than ever before because there's so much writing on the wall after that horrendous 124-330 home defeat to Cork. 4 defeats from 4 for Tip in the Munster Championship. 6 championship defeats in a row going back to last season. Things have been spiralling in the last couple of years. It almost feels at this stage. Trace it all the way back to you win All-Ireland in 2019. Ever since then, there's been heavy losses. There's been minimal progress. And look at where we are now. It feels that Tip are a mile away from being a challenger.
Sure, look, I suppose the thing about it's technically not over, which makes it worse. Like you can't even.
I keep forgetting about that.
Yeah, you can't. Nobody can make officially say draw the line in the sand and start looking ahead to next year because look, we don't know whether we're going to be playing a match in 5 weeks or not, and players are in limbo now. You don't know. I assume there'll be no training for a fortnight. It's like, how do you get players back to Dr. Morris Park for a match that is not going to take? Well, it might not. We don't know till Saturday week whether there is going to be a game, and even if there is going to be a game, will right-thinking people in Croke Park and the Munster Council decide, lads, there's no match. Kerry are coming in, lads, and cut out this nonsense of fucking relegation playoff. Like it's ridiculous. Like, so look, Kerry have to take care of their own business first, and that's their only prerogative at the moment. I don't think there needs to be any more about this debate unless they win that final. So, but you're back to Tip. It's, I don't know. I was trying to compare. I think this is back to 86 territory because you could pick 2003, 2007, and 2012 as the way the year ended badly, but those 3 years ended badly in Croke Park. We achieved something we got to a certain level. Like this year, we barely got off the ground. Like, and look, the opening defeat to Waterford is not looking as good as it did at the time. Clare was bad. I still think Limerick only got to 40% of their intensity levels against Tipperary in the Gaelic rounds. Like if you saw the intensity Limerick got up to the week after against Clare. If they got up to that level, Jesus, they could have blown us out. I just think there's not one problem. There's a lot of little problems building into one and creating the whole thing. Like, and look, there's a lot of decisions to be made over the next while by management, by county board, by everybody, by players. Like I think it's not that this thing couldn't be turned around quickly, but it won't be turned around quickly if certain decisions aren't made, as far as I can see.
Yeah, it just feels like Tipperary have drifted to this point. If you look at the year as a whole, the teams that Tipperary have beaten are Laois and struggled to beat Laois in the league, beat Kilkenny in one of the worst games I've ever watched, and beat Antrim, a much changed Antrim team scoring 7 goals. That's it. Now, I don't care what Tipperary team and players you have. That's a hugely unsuccessful season.
Yeah.
Look at the teams that Tipperary were beaten by. Again, you can say, pre-season didn't really matter, but the Kilmoyley players weren't there for Kerry the time that Tipperary lost to Kerry. That was bad. Well, but we were willing to overlook it at the time. But looking back now, that was even a bad sign. Then beat our loss to Dublin, lost to Waterford. You expect losing to Waterford isn't, there's no real kind of inquest when that happens. Losing at home to Dublin wasn't great. Then lost to Waterford, Clare, Limerick, Cork. But within those, there's mid-game collapses each time. So in Waterford, there was a mid-game collapse of 2-7 to 3 points at one stage. Against Clare, 3-6 to 3 points at one stage in the first half. Against Limerick, 2-8 to 4 points in the last 17 minutes. Against Cork, there was a couple of bad runs. After going well early on, Noel McGrath hits the post at a penalty. They go down the other end and go on a run of 2-13 to 3 points. Second half, 1-9 to 4. Now, I don't really care what happens. That's sort of inexcusable. I don't know whether it's inexcusable on the sideline or whether it's inexcusable within the white lines. And we're joined now by Brian Flannery to talk about this too. I know you were listening in just there before I brought you on, Brian, but what are your reflections on that? You might tilt down the camera just a small bit if you can, Brian, but what are your reflections on Tipperary's year as a whole, I suppose, before we even just talk about the match against Cork? albeit, Tipperary just hit by an avalanche. It's hard to decide which part was the most damning part, but just the year as a whole.
Yeah, look, in a lot of ways, I feel for the likes of Colin Bonner and his management team, because they couldn't have landed at a more difficult stage. The retirements, the injuries, it from a good distance out, it felt as if it was a changing of the guard, that, that dreaded word transition, that it was going to be a difficult year. And very few people would have been predicting, silverware, or even most pundits, if you looked at it, we're talking about that Tipperary would be one of the teams to miss out. But I suppose, look, having said that, you're always hoping for the best. Tipperary is a traditional county. It's a county that expects to be competing. And even, I think it's more maybe the manner of some of the defeats, rather than the fact that they lost the 4 games. You're looking for a little bit more defiance, and there's probably a lot of similarities in the last few weeks with Waterford and Tipperary. You're expecting a little bit more defiance, and a little bit more stubbornness, and a little bit more, less accommodating to the teams that they're playing, that, less accepting of their fate. That's one thing I would say. But I'm thinking I'm a little bit older than the two of you lads, so I remember a stage, was it between 73 and 83, where Tipperary didn't win a game for 9 seasons, or almost 10 years. So look, it's about the next step now. It's about how they're going to rectify it. It's about how to build a group, and that's the job that Colin Bonner has now, is to build a group, to build a team, and it's going to be a new team. Shamie Callanan missing as well. They couldn't have had it more difficult. But it is very much, where do you go from here? How do you build that cohesive group that is going to produce the performances that I suppose a lot of us would believe that Tipperary jersey deserves, and to get back into a situation where you're competing. But look, there's this week isn't a good week, and Sunday certainly wasn't a good week where I was sitting either. But there are positives. There's very good. You look at this year's minor team. You look at the way that the minor team was actually played, and they're playing a style of play. And I might have mentioned it before. I watched Tipperary under-15s playing a number of weeks ago, and they looked really, really good, really, really well coached. Playing through the lines, runners off the shoulders. That sort of game that's now pervasive in all the top teams. And I said to myself, Jesus, there's definitely changes, because I wouldn't have seen that previously. So there is obviously changes happening. It's whether, I suppose, how you integrate that into the current senior panel. And there is going to be discussions, and I suppose questions about, were the best players in there on the panel? Is there better players out there? Tipperary is a big county. There's a lot of clubs in Tipperary. There's a lot of players who've won underage titles in the last few years that haven't featured at any stage. That you'd be thinking, God, I wonder, would they make a difference? So there's a major job of major work to be done. I imagine Colin will be the man to do it. I even talking to people up in North Tipperary, I don't think there's much mood for dramatic change on that front. There seems to be I suppose a acknowledgement of how difficult this year's management have, that they deserve another year to try progress their mission.
Based on what, Brian? I mean, what progress have you seen? Younger players were going to play no matter what. So, and we kind of made loads of excuses about players being injured. But what are the things that you look at in terms of what was done with the players that lined out that would make you say, let's persevere and stick with this, because we can see the team doing this, that, and the other?
Well, maybe the lack of alternatives is as good as it gets. Maybe
that's as damning an indictment as I've ever heard.
But look, there. What can you do? I mean, the performance was disappointing, but you still had half a dozen or more All Ireland medal winners on the field as well. Do you know what I mean?
Which makes it worse in a way.
Well, does it? But I mean, it probably, it's like that old saying, you don't know what you've missed until they're gone. And I think you look at the absentees, and whatever number of lads is coming through, is there a Shamie Callan? And I know I've probably said before, Tipperary needs new heroes. Is there a new Shamie Callan available? Is there a Pádraig Maher? There's a lot of hurlers, but are they in that category? There's now you're right though. I mean, outside of that, then it's a question of you've got to make the best of what you have. You've got to come up with a way of playing that suits the players that you have. There's no point in talking about what other counties do if you don't have a Garrod Hegarty, or you don't have a Peter Duggan on the edge of the square or whatever. If you don't have those type of players, you're going to have to cut your cloth according to measure and come up with a game that suits Tipperary. Tipperary is still there's still I suppose teams and players that primarily skill would be the one thing you'd associate as much or more than anything with Tipperary hurling. That surely hasn't changed in 12 months. But
I think Brian, the fact is that for all that, like, Tipperary still shouldn't be embarrassed by Clare and Cork at home, even with all that lack of experience. Like that was the thing that was hurting for me, is that we just, I don't know, we look disjointed for a lot of the campaign, and it's like, how does that change this year? For next year, I keep getting reminded of Pádraig Fanning and his year at Waterford and all this, that once, and it had very eerie similarities, that once, like, the Waterford were hockeyed in their 4 matches that year, and they looked disjointed, and you sort of knew. And I think that if Fanning stayed on, would things change for the following year? And it probably would. It's how do you change the disjointedness of it from one year to the next? That's my worry. Is that will more players retire? Will some younger players opt not to maybe come back into the same setup? There's an awful lot of thinking to be done, and over the next while by county board management, etc.
You need a core. You need who's going to play centre back. You need to know who's leading the attack. Who's going to be centre forward. You need building blocks around. They're probably, I suppose, look, if you wanted to be critical, the Tipperary ended the league and you still weren't sure of any of these questions. And I'm sitting here today, I'm not certain who's going to be in those jerseys next year either. And that's probably where, if you, as I said, if you want to be critical, there's where you need to be settling on, can we solve a problem in that position? Have we someone that we can develop there, and then stick with them? Because, there's going to be a bit of growing pains, but, that's probably, I suppose, the disappointing thing or the worrying thing was that, you came out of the league and you really weren't certain, and there's loads of players you could talk about. You could talk about your Barry Heffernans, or, is he playing fullback? Is he playing midfield? Is he playing wing back? Where's Ronan Mar? There just wasn't enough pillars around which to build and around which you could assimilate a couple of young fellas into that might work. There just wasn't enough building blocks there. And as I said, look, that's sometimes you got to, Cork have kind of made a decision on Kieran Joyce centre back, and they're going with it. They had, they took him a while to realise, look, Mark Coleman wasn't going to work maybe at centre back. But there's some of these issues they're going to have to sit down and have a long look at and see exactly where they're going at. What are we going to look like next April? What is Tipperary going to look like next April? Where, how many of the 34 or 5 that we've had in this year and we've played, how many of them are, number one, good enough, and number two, I suppose, just going to be there and available? Grant talking about fellas out in, Koh Samui or wherever they are, but are they committed? You know what I mean? Like, you in fairness, you had fellas that they turned up. Do you know what I mean? They put the jersey on, didn't work, but you got to, there's plenty of thought required, but is throwing it all out and getting rid of the management or looking for a new, I don't know, is that going to have you further down the line than where you're hoping to be maybe in 2 or 3 years?
Yeah, Shane, look, when I looked at the team the other day, I thought puck outs, not happening there. There was times when the likes of Shane Kingston and Darragh Fitzgibbon were picking them up, so there's no basic setup from what I can see from the puck outs on the long ones. Then on the short ones, the Cork players were able to walk it out. There was no pressure put on them. They could hand it across to, for example, Kieran Joyce and Mark Coleman. There was no pressure put on them. They were never setting up traps. They were never creating lanes to send Cork down. It was all very basic stuff that I thought in previous games, standing over frees from their own half for like 30 seconds rather than hitting a quick one, hitting wides from 100 yards. Like I come in, like running the ball out through the lines. Actually did okay with pretty much the first move of the match. Brilliant move for that early goal, but no sign of it thereafter. Then you have Willie Maher and my brother Paddy on Tip FM the other night talking about whether the team is conditioned well enough. This is something we've seen in a few games falling off the map late in the games. I talked about those mid-game collapses. And another thing then is about the GDAs. Now, games development administrators. Now, this was something that Willie talked about when he said there's only 4 GDAs in the county, and he contrasted it with Wexford, where he said there's something like 16 or 17. Now, part of me, I'd look at Borris-Lee and I'd see a lot of the former players involved that are, still young men getting involved, and there's players coming through and all that. And I'm sure other clubs feel that way too. So part of me thinks the clubs are doing great jobs. Other parts think, well, maybe more GDAs would help. But like those issues about just general setup, they kind of really hurt my confidence in the management. Then you've got the physical conditioning, and I'm wondering what's going on there. And then looking at the other thing, the GDAs. What are your thoughts on those areas?
Look, it was like more GDAs. I think there's more GDAs in Offaly now than there is in Tipperary. Like we've had 4 probably for the guts of 20 years, and like I do think that you'd probably do. I think to some extent too much can be made of the GDAs. I think that could dissolve a lot of the responsibility of clubs to be doing the right thing too. Like so, and look, I still think clubs are generally doing an awful lot of good work. Like it's when they get into Dr. Morris Park, into the development squads. And look, I believe based on the first year of the Satanta link up that things have improved. Like we've Brian's name checked the 15s, the minors, look a completely different team to last year. The 20s probably still have a bit of catching up to do. They were very competitive this year. Probably a small bit of naivety, and they could have been in the All Ireland final last weekend ahead of Limerick. So like that's trend. Like, I suppose just in terms of like if Bonner stays and he changes his backroom team, and who's willing to come on board then and maybe come onto that ship? Like he's still the captain of the ship. Is he still going to get the same buy-in from the same group of players? Like I've heard a couple of things that you probably expect a few elder statesmen retirements, but I'm hearing a couple of things that maybe one or two of the guys in their late 20s maybe thinking about packing it in too. Like so, if you start going from loads of experience and to have no experience, like, and I think that's there's an awful lot of things have to be put on the table here. It's like I'm not looking for anyone's head here. Like I want Colin Bonner's the most honourable man you can get, and like you could see on his face, like we were doing the interview with him afterwards in one of the dressing rooms, and the man was heartbroken. Like he is blue and gold to the core. Like he's hurting here, but like my worry is like Colin Bonner was the most hard work and never give up sort of player in his tip day, but there did look like a couple of tip players that weren't either mentally or physically weren't able to give it everything in the last few weeks, and that's not right. And I suppose it does ultimately come back to him. Look, you saw the frustration, like Alan Flynn's red card. Alan Flynn is probably the cleanest hurler in the county. What he did is a right red card. It was correctly red carded, but that was nearly pure frustration. Was Tommy Dunn rightly or wrongly getting suspended and having words with Johnny Murphy? Was that him losing his cool? Like, is it a sign that everything is not quite right as it should be within a team that's going well? Like, I suppose a Tipperary team shouldn't be losing an average by 9 points in the championship. Like that's poor. And I know people joking me saying like, if you have to get Kerry, you beat them. But like if you're Tip coming in to play Kerry, who have won a McDonagh Cup and are coming in on a high, and like Tip are on the floor at the moment. Like there's no plan for training for the next 2 weeks. on the basis that maybe there will be a game. Look, probably the best case scenario is they go back to their clubs for a fortnight, and that's the way to keep ticking over. But still, you'd like to think there was a plan there in place, hypothetically ready to go if things didn't work out last weekend, even if Tipperary had played well and lost by a couple of points. Like so, Jesus, it's I suppose it's just frustrating. Like, and I suppose I still think we have an awful lot of good players there that should be hurling an awful lot better than they are.
What should happen in the next 11 months, Brian, to ensure that the next championship doesn't go quite like how this one did?
Yeah, look, that's the most important thing. It's, I think there's going to be, you need to, I suppose, to really take a scalpel through that panel. There's probably 40 players or whatever there now, and there'll probably be a few lads dropping out, and you've got to be looking, is there players outside that panel that can come in and make an impact, whether you're looking at this year's under-20s, whether you're looking at recent years under-20s, and like we've named, I could name off half a dozen players that, as I said, that I would have, I would go to most of the minor 21 games in recent years, and I said, God, I can't understand why he hasn't got a run, at least in the league.
Yeah.
There's 8, 9, 10 of those players that's out there that, you'd be saying, well, look, let's look at them. Maybe they mightn't be the silky skilled guys that can throw balls over lads' heads, but maybe you need to get a couple of different types of players in, maybe more on the athletic style of player, that'll augment what you have in relation to skill wise. There has to be, a panel of players in Tipperary, the size of the county, that's capable of coming together, committing for the next couple of years to try turn things around. And it's not going to be, you're going to look for you're not going to be winning trophies, I'd imagine, in the short term, but you need a roadmap to where you want to get to. You probably even need to be looking at some of the underage, whether it is minors or that, and identifying, handful of players in particular out of those that you might bring in for a couple of sessions next year, and you have them kind of involved in some shape or form, or they might come in for an all mixed match where you're sitting down and talking to them, and you're plotting their career paths as well. But it's going to take time. I don't think you turn around some of the performances we've seen this year and rock up next year and it's going to be all swept away. You're looking for little victories. You're looking for getting back to competing, being in games, winning a couple of games, and giving you then that confidence to build on it, over a period of time. But there's a serious body of work there to do all of that, and the benefits of it may not be seen next season. It may be the year after. But you've got to have that aim in mind. You've got to have an aim that you have a panel of players that you're going into these round robin games where you have an even chance of winning them. At the moment, it's hard to say that you have that. And let's be honest about it, very few people thought that going into this year's championship either. That there just wasn't enough there. But
it's just a matter of the performances. Like, it's just the. As Shane said there, we started off with a first good sharp puck out and we got a great goal out of it, but then we seem to abandon it. Like, it's just I don't know. I just don't think the players and the goal. It doesn't seem to be complete buy-in to what they're trying to do, or whether the players don't understand about what they're being asked to do. Like, that's sort of.
I come away from the year having no idea what the plan was.
Yeah, that could be down to a bit of reluctance as well. It's like looking at Kilkenny. Yeah. You see him passing a few balls there out of defence. You say, God, Jesus, they're changing their style a bit, and then the pressure comes on, and there's ball up the field. You know what I mean? It takes a bit of time for that to be ingrained. It takes time for it to be, where players are absolutely comfortable with doing it and comfortable making a mistake and still doing it and going at it and keep doing it. As I said, I was really surprised at this. I know it's an under 15 team, but the way they were playing the game was it was automatic to them. They were hitting 30-yard passes. They were your fine hurler of a centre back came out. He wasn't looking to hit the full forward line. He was looking for that sharp pass, and he was looking to run again. It really kind of stood out to me. God, this is very different.
Yeah.
The current panel players probably haven't that. You know what I mean? That takes a little bit of time.
But the under-20s are doing it straight away in the space of the first season, 6 months. And I get it. Senior level is a much different animal. But we saw signs of it happening in the first few games, and then it just seemed to disappear. So I came away from it thinking we're not actually building towards anything because that seemed to just be abandoned.
Well, there is you're going back to, there is management responsibility on that side of it. You know, if the message must be clear, it must be reinforced, and now you got to have buy-in from the players as well. Look, it's not a them and us management players. They've all got to buy into it, and not only that. Look, this is the way it's now. This is the way it's going to be next year as well. You know, and so that's maybe one of the things that the if you have continuity, maybe in management, it'll be a help as well. But I'm not sure. As I said, Colin wouldn't have spoken an awful lot about his ambition for the way Tipperary, play, or that. You'd imagine that's something that they've discussed regularly, internally anyway, within the panel.
Yeah, there's a few comments in here. River Power says definitely better players in Tip that weren't on the bench. Billy Seymour, Max Hackett, Sean Hayes, Devin Ryan, to name a few. The trials in winter was madness. Paul Tierney says few players I think should be in. Conor Whelan, Ray McCormick, Sean Hayes, Johnny Campion urged Jerome Cahill, Colin English to commit. Just a small thing, says Noel Cal. Why say was Declan Laffin not even a selector considering his record? Looks like selectors have to play for Tipperary seniors and not actually be any good. Stapleton is fuming. He's going to blow up, says River Power. Well, look, I'm just as frustrated as everyone is here. But that's just, I suppose, the way it is. Shane, is there anything else you want to say about Tipperary before we move on?
I suppose just the thing is, like, if you was to call him as 2 years left, like, if the same management team go in next year, will anything change? Like, if he decides Tommy, Paul, and Johnny, thanks very much, I'm gonna. If he does that and maybe comes in with a completely new backroom team, younger coach, and maybe a modern way of thinking, maybe you think, okay, the players might think, okay, something's changing here. Now things might change. That's my worry, is that if nothing changes over the next 6 months, the same management team, will this get to the same buy-in from the players? That's my concern. But then you say who would want to take it on if the vacancy did become available? But then I'd be thinking, is this not the perfect time if a vacancy came up where there's you're coming in nearly a clean slate, no expectations, you can nearly do what you want, build the team as you want it, get in the players. Probably you wouldn't be expected maybe to get out of Munster next year. Probably would get a chance, like so. So I just think it's a big couple of months ahead, like, in terms of what Colin decides to do, what the county board decide to do. There are other scenarios. Maybe there'll be a couple of guys will come available, and you go, God, maybe now is the time to strike. Like, who knows? Like, so.
Yeah, Brian, slightly mischievous question. What odds would you give on Liam Cahill being Tipperary manager last year after the way things have panned out for both counties?
God, isn't it amazing how things change so quickly? And this managers' games and their stock rising and falling. It is amazing how things change quickly. Look, Liam Cahill is still, in my mind, an excellent manager. I would say I don't think you can jump from one county to the other overnight. I think there'd have to be a period of, a period away maybe, or something. Interestingly, when he was asked a question in the post-game interview Sunday, he was very non-committal. There was an air of, have we brought this Waterford team as far as we can?
It was a strong 5 of 1 foot out the door, wasn't there?
It was a strong element of uncertainty, certainly. So I'm not sure, but I don't see an immediate switch over anyway. And again, I'm not sure what sort of the relationship between Liam Carroll, Tip County Board, what way that conversation, they obviously had a conversation about Liam taking over. It didn't end with Liam taking the Tipperary job if it was offered. So maybe there's a bit of friction there too that'll take a little bit of time to iron out, but I certainly wouldn't see it immediately, and like there's obviously the same debate is going on down here in the southeast about where did it all go wrong, management, players, who's at fault, county board, everybody's getting blamed. I nearly get blamed myself here for pundits getting blamed. Everybody is wrong when things fall that far.
Shane, where do you think it went wrong for Waterford and Liam Cahill?
I think there's I wouldn't get too caught up in what Michael Ryan said or what Derek McGrath said after the league. I don't think the management and players would have been affected too much by that, but I do think there's an element that maybe they went too hard too early in the league, and definitely you could see maybe in the last few weeks, definitely the staleness coming in, that bit of energy, that bit of energy and enthusiasm and drive that they had earlier in the league wasn't there. Other teams probably had caught up on them and maybe they were slightly exposed. But I suppose the worry for me is that was still a very, very experienced top class Waterford team that went to Ennis and were 2-16 to 9 points down at half time. It smacked of a team that gave up. And like if you're a team that's starting to give up even for a top class manager, can you turn that around? I think the only way Liam Cahill stays for another year is if the leadership group for the Waterford players come to him and say, you still have our full backing. If that doesn't happen, I don't think he will. I think it was 1 year with the extension of another. Is that it, Brian? Was it 1 year with possibly a second?
Like, I mean, the difference between the two counties, I suppose, is this is Liam's third year, so in comparison with Colin Bonner starting out, so there's a real sense of disappointment with the performance up in Ennis. As I said, look, and for me the disappointing thing is, look, you've got to have personal pride as a player as well, and I was sitting there behind the subs, and you're looking at the Brian Lohan looking for the sub goalie to go in. It's the ultimate insult when so it was a tough watch. It was definitely a tough watch. Management, did they make mistakes as well? Look, the 3-week break from the Limerick game, obviously there's a lot of discussion down here. Did they train too hard? How come they were competitive against Limerick up in Gaelic grounds, and then you turn up in Welsh Park and are off the pace? And that end of the day, that's the game. Losing to Cork in Welsh Park was a game that they really lost. And I think after that, where it shouldn't be, it sucked the life out of them. Losing to Cork in Welsh Park sucked the life out of them. And you hear about body language and all that, but I was in Cusack Park early, and you're watching the teams coming in and all the Clare players, and they high-fiving the kids and fist pumping and not a care in the world. And that I definitely got a sense from the Waterford panel that that was mother of sorrows. You know what I mean? That you didn't have that it wasn't guys looking forward to going out there. That's the impression. As I said, that's very amateur psychology, I know, but unfortunately they played like that. They played like you talk about soccer and teams, they're already on holidays or want the season to end. It looked like they just wanted the year to end and didn't want to and really give, it's a shocking performance. You know what I mean? There's no point in saying otherwise. And there were like 8 points to 1 down after 10 minutes. Do you know what I mean? It went wrong from early on and stayed going wrong. And there were 20 points down at one stage in the second half. A few scores near the end took the very bad look off it, but there was no consolation anywhere to be seen in Ennis. Now, I did think that they, like, leaving Stephen Bennett out of the starting 15 to me was a surprise. You ended up at the start of the match for the throw-in, probably your two most consistent forwards in the last few years, Austin Gleeson and Stephen Bennett, not in the forward line. Austin Gleeson was playing centre back and Stephen Bennett was in the stand or on the bench. you know, I don't know. As I said,
Yeah, it sort of smacked of Liam looking for, like, as a reminded me of what he did in 2018 after the Munster Under-21 final in Cork. For the Galway game, he made mass changes. Paddy Cadell lost his place, and Paddy was on the senior squad, I think, around then, and Robert Byrne came in, and I think Jerome Cahill might have gone to the forwards out of the backs, and it ended up working for him, like, and maybe he was trying to pull that a rabbit out of the hat, just so something to spark them into life, but it just didn't happen, like, so.
No, and Cork Manny was selected at centre field, and like we all assumed, you know, he was there that he would be taking the frees then as well, and ended up that Patrick Curran was taking the frees and missed a couple. So, you know, there was just an inconsistency in relation to some of that. Cork Manny wasn't on the 26 for the previous game, and he's straight in at centre field. There, you know, it was like you said, they looked at the Cork game and said, Jesus, this is going the wrong direction. We need to do something dramatic, but it didn't work, and it spectacularly didn't work. So then it you know, would you have been better off? Look, having to huddle lads out back. Gee, we've you know, we're all either going to go out together. You know, we're either going to win together or we're all going down together. You know, as opposed to making. I thought there were probably two dramatic changes going into, you know, from one week to the next. I was certainly surprised.
Yeah, and then also you had.
But I was just like Bennett's form at post league. Like, geez, I can't. It's hard to understand how he's fallen so far. Like, so.
Yeah, for one day in the previous 3 games. But having said that, to me, he's still a player that had credit in the bank. That you know, I'd be starting him. Do you know what I mean? It's I'm not sure even what sort of a message that sends to other lads. Is it that, oh well, look, we can anybody can be dropped, or I'd be saying, Jesus, let's get him, because he's in fair. He's a worker. Do you know what I mean? He will. He always gives it his best, even when things aren't going well for him. As I said, he's a player I'd have. I suppose look at a huge time for him. To be honest,
I'd be curious to know what the vibe is in Waterford in the last few days in terms, you know, and the mood music around Liam Cahill and continuing on. And then, of course, the team was leaked last week, so that in itself isn't particularly good. John Milan was talking about that in the aftermath of it. What's the vibe around Waterford hurling? What are people saying down there?
Look, in general, and I suppose look, maybe it shouldn't be general, but I think in general, people recognise that Liam Cahill is an excellent manager, and I think the hope is that, you know, that management players that sit down over the next number of weeks and that all, I suppose, you know, come to the conclusion that they're better together than apart. Because, as I said, he is an excellent manager and has proven that. Like it feels very hollow today, but they did win a National League title. There's only 3 titles that you can win. Maybe the league is the least of the 3 of them, and more so now than ever. But you know, I think people would like to think that he'd stay on, and you know, the age profile of this team is that they're, you know, they're there or thereabouts. You know, can they get it right to make it a better fist of it next year? I think that would be the general feeling. You know, I think a lot of people are disappointed as much or more with players than they are management, to be honest with you. But it's, you know, there's no easy solutions. There's no easy answers. I suppose that's the disappointing thing, is that how can you go from being so good in the league and, you know, and a league final, and a few weeks later, the same Cork team is beating you in Welsh Park, and you go up to Ennis and make a show of yourself.
Is there anything in that, Brian, is that actually the Ballygunner thing being so successful could become a hindrance, that they're going to go deep into maybe Munster All Ireland every year, and they're not going to be fresh when they're like. I just found it strange that for most of the championship, Desi Hutchinson was the only Ballygunner player that played regularly. Pádraig Mahoney coming in and out, Ian Kenny coming in and out, Peter Hogan, I think did he only start last weekend for the first time, or did he play against Cork? Very, very few of that core of that very good Ballygunner team actually made it onto the Waterford team.
Yeah, look, it is unusual that you have All Ireland club champions and Ballygunner being the first team from Waterford ever to win it, and having so few. Like, in effect, Desi Hutchinson was the only nailed-on player that played this year, or that was going to play. Now, okay, mitigating circumstance. Stephen O'Keefe, had he made himself available, would he have been Waterford number one? Probably. Philip Manny, if he made himself available, would he have been in the mix? Probably as well. But I think genuinely the response, I suppose, the reaction to the public is people in general thought, look, the best players were on the field. Do you know what I mean? Ballygunner have, they probably have 60 very good hurlers. They have a couple of outstanding hurlers. Do you know what I mean? That it's not a case that that there was obvious players not in the starting lineup from your 8 in a row county champions as well as All Ireland club champions, Munster champions. I don't think it's an issue, and I think it's one of the things that would have been said about the say previous teams and the last 20-25 years in Waterford is that I suppose the legacy is that you have players from all over the county, from your Clashmores, even underage Stradbally, which is a football stronghold, are now playing in Division 1 hurling under 13. There's, you have a greater spread from different clubs. So, the fact that you don't have your county champions dominating it, like may have been the case in the past, I don't think it's a huge issue. It probably is a disadvantage from an individual point of view that you're going to an All-Ireland club final. The way the seasons are gone now, you're popping back into the middle of a league campaign. Are you a bit behind where other lads are? Have you got less of a chance? It's probably a bit of a disadvantage for the individual players. But as an issue, I don't think. I mean, a lot is made that, oh, well, look, it's going to be a great confidence boost for Waterford county team that they've Ballygunner won the club final. I don't think there's very little evidence in a lot of counties that, having a club that's very successful feeds into the county scene. I mean, Coola is probably as good an example of as any.
There's very few. Like Burr probably made it work, and like I suppose Clare clubs when they dominated Munster, I suppose that was when Clare senior team was going. But it's very Galway football has never benefited from Cork being so good for so long. Like.
Yeah, I wonder then, just if we look at the provincial finals coming up, Galway are going to be against Kilkenny. Wexford have gotten through as well after winning at Nolan Park. Limerick and Clare is going to be the Munster final, and Cork are also through. So a question put in here by Paul Tierney: who are Limerick's biggest challengers now that Waterford are gone? They were mine, a real surprise. Shane, what's your pecking order at the moment?
Sure, it's still Limerick number one, because I think they're Limerick are about peaking in June, July. I don't think we've seen Limerick anywhere near their best. I think we'll see something better against them against Clare. I wouldn't be surprised if Clare won the Munster final. I think Clare have been the surprise package. They've been the standout team of the round robin so far. So I think Clare are the closest challengers. We don't know what about Galway yet because they've been so comfortable in Leinster. So. But that's not to say I think if Galway win the Leinster Championship, Leinster final, I think we can take them seriously because I fully expect if Galway do win the Leinster final, they'll have done it having beaten a ferocious Kilkenny team. I can only imagine what Cody is going to be like in Nolan Park for the next 2 weeks after the manner of that performance.
They don't have the players, Shane. Kilkenny don't have the players.
But they're the one team that, if they're spiky enough, they're going to come with something big. And
don't see it.
Oh, geez, I would not be a bit surprised if Kilkenny beat Galway on Saturday week. I wouldn't. I just don't.
Yeah, but I'm talking beyond that. I'm talking about challenging for an All-Ireland.
I'm just saying that game. What I'm saying is, if Galway win that game, they'll have beaten a Kilkenny team so primed and motivated that it will. Whatever about Kilkenny do after that, I don't care. But I think Galway are going to come up a fully primed and focused Kilkenny team that day. And if Galway win that game, I think they'll be well set for having an assault on an All-Ireland. That's the point I'm making.
Brian, what's your pecking order, and do you want to pick up that point that Shane made?
Yeah, look, maybe it's recency bias, but I mean, I was really impressed. I mean, I saw Clare up in Thurles against Tipperary. I've watched them last Sunday. I think the big difference, Clare, this year, you can't underestimate the likes of Peter Duggan coming back in. Shane O'Donnell is absolutely flying. I think they are contenders. Clare. in fairness to him, and they've good hurlers all out. Rory Hayes is as good a cornerback that's in it as well. McInerney wingback is really playing well. They have a core there that's quite strong as well, and they have these young players. I know young Rogers didn't play or is injured at the moment, but they expect that he'll be back.
Injured.
Young Meehan came on and scored a few points. Like they have players coming as well. I think, Limerick are still the team to beat. For me, Clare, Galway. I'm a bit like Shane. I'm unconvinced that at the end of the day, Kilkenny I don't think they have the horses really.
No.
I just don't think I don't think they have enough. Yes, they're difficult to beat. Yes, they are defiant, but they wouldn't have wanted Wexford beating them last week either, and they weren't able to prevent it. So, I'd say that's kind of the order. Galway are still a little bit. It's a little bit. Do you trust them? Do you know what I mean? Do you trust them in a big occasion? I suppose a couple of years ago, most people would have said Galway have the physicality, that they have the players, the McInerneys and Dahi Burke, and that will be strong enough to stand up to Limerick. So I think they're still in with a shout.
Just before we let you go, Brian, a question on your fellow Killadangan man, Dara Egan. The gun was to his head in a way, I suppose, to win in Nolan Park after drawing with Westmeath. Everyone thought, oh my God, what way is this season going at all? But he's done it. He got that victory in Nolan Park and they're through.
Yeah, and I think the Westmeath, the footage was so bad I could see very little of it. But I think the goalkeeper threw a couple of balls into the net, probably didn't help matters either up there. Look, I'd be delighted for Dara. Like it's all these jobs are games. Like I was sitting with Kieran Kingston after the game in Welsh Park, and the relief, I'd say he's on the man, the pressure that's involved in all these games and how you can change so quickly. I mean, Cork were out the gap, gone, and next minute now they're back in it, and Wexford were the same. Who would have said after failing to beat couldn't beat Westmeath that they'd be still in the championship? But he's obviously he certainly has the players. Players wouldn't have turned up and produced that sort of performance in Nolan Park if they didn't buy into what he's trying to do up there. Have they enough? Have Wexford enough really at the end of the day maybe to get them over the line in the big games? Lee Chin starting and playing well was a big help. They need everybody firing. Do you know what I mean? They have the strength and depth that other counties have, maybe not, but it isn't that long ago since they had Tipperary and and I'm going to say on their knees, but certainly they had the opportunity in All-Ireland semi-final a couple of years ago and they didn't take it. Again, when you're a county coming like that, it's that, have you the confidence, have you the belief to win those big knockout games? And in fairness, it was a knockout game for Dara Egan's Wexford, and they turned up and they performed, and in fairness, they got what they deserved. They got the victory.
I guess it's just, I think, I suppose we're not in it now, but it'll be interesting to see how it plays out from here. Like, will Limerick find that gear we haven't seen from them this year? Will Clare push on? Will Cork, just if they get on a run of momentum, could they do something? I don't know if there's an All-Ireland in them yet, but I just a Cork team of confidence. Like I think they had flaws last year. I just think maybe they're slightly more better set up now, and look, they'll score with anyone. It's keeping them out at the other end is the problem. Like, and I think it's so volatile, this hurling championship. Like you can't, from one, like you say, if Wexford drawn with Westmeath, you think they have no hope in Kilkenny, and then they go do that. Like it's just so volatile at the moment. Like.
Absolutely is. Brian, thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate your thoughts and insights there. Okay, so look, let's go and talk a little bit of football, will we? Or do you want to make one final comment on the hurling?
Sure. Look, it's come back home to Tip. Like I don't know. I just think there's a lot of brave decisions to be made. Like, and I suppose it's tough decisions, but brave decisions. Like in terms of just. Do the county boards feel that Colm is the right man? Does Colm feel he's the right man? If Colm says so, does he say to his coaches, like, I'm going to go do something completely fresh and things like that? Like, I just think what happens over the next 6 to 8 weeks or whatever, I just think it could determine whether Tip turn it or start moving back up the graph next year, or whether we're going to flatline for a couple of years. That's not being dramatic. That's just, I think, where we are at the moment.
Yeah, look, I think we gave this management team every chance possible throughout the league, saying, look, let's be patient. They're trying to move the ball through the hands. Remember, we were saying that around the time of the Kilkenny game. Then we were highlighting the amount of players missing. But it's very hard to keep focusing on the positives when so many negatives are thrown in front of you. And then when you analyse the track record of the management teams, some of them are only starting out. And I've heard, some good things about the lads starting out. But yeah, there's not really enough to tell you that, look, this is the style of hurling Tip will be playing in a few years' time. This is what the management teams have achieved in the past, so that therefore you can move forward with confidence. And like you're saying there's probably going to be a period of introspection, and maybe there will be some realizations that, perhaps the way this thing has gone, there might be need for a change. We'll wait and see. I mean, you'd be hopeful that they can turn it around. It's just there's not enough there to tell you that it will. But anyway, look.
The thing for me is that the spirit looked gone last weekend, and I was thinking, how do you get the spirit back with the same group and the same management? Like if we went completely back with the very same thing next year, how do you get that spirit back? Like I'm not sure. I'm not sure you can without something changing massively. Whether the same management decides, okay, certain number of players, thanks to your service, we're going to start fresh with some new blood and drive it from there, or whether the county board decide we can't afford to allow it to slip any further without drastic change maybe in the management side. So it'd be interesting to see what happens. I just think I think as Noel Dunnan said in the back of the star, like there's no point making rash decisions now. Let the next few weeks play out. Like it's early May. You're not looking till the training started 8th of December last year. Like Tip are going to have to start breaking the rules and maybe start coming back October, November. And then you're looking at Tip probably haven't hit the ground running in the league next year, which then potentially means maybe having some energy sapped by the time the championship comes next year. So it's just an awful lot to think about.
Yeah, and it will certainly be very raw this week, but there does need to be a root and branch review of what's happening, and even within the people that are doing that review, making sure they're the right people, and then making sure that whoever's looking after the S&C, are they the best of the best within Satanda that are doing it, or is it, because you need a culture of excellence, not a culture of sure that'll do. So just have to make sure that root and branch, this is best in class for Tipperary all the time if they want to get the best out of what Tip have. So let's talk a bit about the football. So Tipperary are out against Carlow this weekend in the Tailteann Cup. The season so far was promotion from Division 4, as people will remember, losing to Cavan in the final. Then beat Waterford in the first round of the Munster Championship, 2-13 to 1-8. Then losing comprehensively enough for a finish, I suppose. The scoreline was 2-10 to 10 points, but second half Limerick were well in charge. This weekend, away to Carlow, a team that Tipperary beat. I think we were both there watching it, 2-16 to 11 points. That was the 20th of March, so just a couple of months ago. Is there much to suggest that Tipperary can't go to Carlow and get a win in this game?
I suppose the pressure is on. They'll be expected to go down there and win. I suppose anytime you go away from home, there's always creates that element of difficulty. Carlow will be sitting idle for a good few weeks since the lost was allowed in the opening. Was it in the Leinster Championship with conceding 5 goals? So it all depends on how they've been put down the time since. I suppose in fairness to Tip have had a couple of games in the meantime, even though one was a loss to Limerick. You feel like that game will stand to them. I think that they expect to have Kevin Fahey back from injury this week, which would be a positive. You'd hope that game would have brought along Stephen O'Brien and Mark Russell come back from injuries. You'd like to think it's a potential banana skin, but if they get over it, look, you're on your way. That was the one thing after losing the game is to get back on the horse straight away and win. And I think for Tip, if Tip could just come out of Carlow and win it this week, at least you're winning. You're back on the horse again, and you have a bit of positive momentum. And I just like to see maybe Tipperary play with a bit more adventure, a bit more energy the next day against Carlow. I know looking at the weather for Sunday, it's looking very, very warm. So it's going to be energy zapping conditions. But look, just it's away from home. It's a banana skin. Go down there, get the win, get into the next round, and hopefully with a good performance of that. And like I think, you think Tip are in the easy on paper. They're in the easier region of the two. So you like to think get through get through Carlow. Potentially you have a home game against New York. I would think Offaly would probably beat Wicklow. I'd fancy Westmeath to beat Laois. And if you got if you had to play one of those two teams at home, you'd fancy your chances there too. Not underplaying them, but like they're good teams. But like you think they're toss-up games. If Tipperary play at their best, they fancy themselves to win them. Like so. So look, just hopefully they go down to Carlow and get the job done at the weekend.
Yeah. So then to talk about the Tipperary camogie team, drawn with Clare at the weekend, having lost a couple of games to them already this year. What are your thoughts on where Tip are going? I think it's Dublin this weekend.
Yeah, I watched the game online last Saturday evening. Like it was a tough watch, like 10 points apiece. Like it definitely smacked of two teams that they're nearly over familiar with each other at this stage. Like they played in a drawn Munster semi-final. They played in the replay only a couple of weeks before that. So that there was an awful lot of, both teams knew what there was coming from each other. I still think Tip probably had enough chances to have won the game, particularly in the first half, and then to win the couple of cup draws. They had some bad wides, and but like Clare, very, very difficult team to play against. Like they're very well organised, and I thought they got their scores an awful lot easier than Tipperary did. But look, that being said, I think Clare are as much as maybe Tip maybe have stagnated a small bit this year, Clare have definitely improved an awful lot. So I don't think it's maybe long term, it's probably not a bad result in the greater scheme of things. So as long as they go on and win the games they're expected to win, and I suppose away to Dublin this weekend is very, very true. I think this could be a pivotal game, whereas I would have fancied maybe Waterford to beat Dublin last weekend in the first round, but Dublin went down to Waterford and won. So you're probably thinking if Tipperary go to Parnell Park and win, I suppose they're creating a situation where at least you have the head-to-head over potentially a team you could be vying for maybe second or third place for. Like so, there's a Cork and Clare, very, very tough game to call this weekend. So, like I think it'll help Tipperary, even though going away from home is difficult. They're not playing it like they're going for the first time in about 6 weeks. They're preparing for a team that's not Clare, if you know what I mean. Like the last 3 competitive games have been against Clare, whereas I think they'll be relieved now to go out and play somebody completely different, that they're not overthinking their game against, that they're not completely, God, we know what that player is going to do or what system they're going to play, whereas Dublin you'd like to think there'll be a bit of freshness all around in terms of new opponent and maybe the way they're going to play.
Any final thoughts before we finish up? I'm almost afraid you'll bring it around to the Tip senior hurling team again.
Actually, like it's so strange. I know people say, "Oh God, it's not good for Tip to be out early." But look, whether it's the 22nd of May or the 22nd of June, look, I think a year has to end when it has to end, whether it's May, June, or July. And like, I don't think we're probably going anywhere. We saw that debate in the Sunday game. Like I'm just so fed up of the national media, and I see Mark Breheny was ahead today about early finishes, and like Tipperary Club Championship is probably going to start late June, and I think the only thing in town will be Tipperary will be the Club Championship. But like a lot of people in Tip won't care who they're about the latter stages, the All Ireland senior hurling and football. Like will have moved on, like, and that'll be the way it is. Like it'll be strange. It'll be exciting in some ways to have club hurling back in the middle of June, July, and August again. Like so, and look, that'll help move on from what we've seen, and hopefully we get into latter stages of the year. And look, what happened difficult this year will be long gone, and hopefully there'll be an eagerness to come back afresh in 2023.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's it for the show today. Don't forget to go out and pick up a copy of the Nina Guardian, and we'll be back again soon. All right, Shane, chat to you later.
Oh yeah.